Hello out there in YouTube land. Today we're going to take a look at this rather old PC right here. This is a 233 megahertz Pentium MMX on a baby AT motherboard. Has 128 megs of memory. It has a 3.2 gig hard drive, IDE. As you can see, has a DVD-ROM, CD burner, 5 1/4 inch floppy drive, and two 3.5 inch floppy drives, the top one of which is not hooked up and is there only for the reason that I did not have any blank faceplates for this thing, and out of general laziness and being kind of cheap, I didn't go and try to find one. This machine currently has two operating systems loaded on it. Has one Microsoft MS-DOS 6.22 with Windows for Workgroups 3.11. Also, it can dual boot, although on the same partition, which we will explain later. It also has IBM's OS2 Warp version 4.52. This is the last official IBM release of OS2. This is the screen that it's hooked up to. Unfortunately, this monitor does not do 4/3 aspect ratio at all. It will not even give me the option of doing a letterbox format, or whatever you call it when you have the black bars on the left and right sides. So the display tends to be a little bit distorted. Anyhow, let's go back around here and we will power this baby on. As you can see, the speed display is not quite right. I have never bothered to really look at the jumper settings for this display. It's configured, the display on here is configured by jumpers on the back on a small circuit board, not in any way detecting the actual speed of the processor. Anyway, it doesn't have enough segments to display 233 anyway, so I haven't really considered it too big of a problem. So, you can see that this is not a DOS boot sector on here. At one point I did have BIOS, whatever, however you say that, on here, but that is no longer the case. I have never tried to go back in and put a normal boot sector on here, although I do know how to do that. It just has not been a huge priority. Anyway, the only one that works here is MS-DOS 6.22, so we'll go ahead and select that. Have a startup menu here. Mostly I use this as a productivity and development kind of machine for writing old school applications, but I have my config.sys and autoexec.bat files set up so that I can use less memory in configurations for gaming and the like. But we'll go ahead and load up the full configuration here, including networking and everything else. Extended memory test. Extended memory is memory above 1 megabyte. Since in the DOS world, or I should say the world of the 8088, only 1 megabyte of memory is directly addressable, the upper 384 kilobytes of that being reserved for ROM BIOS, video, and other things. So that leaves 600, the famous 640K limitation for what is called, in the DOS world, conventional memory. There is also expanded memory, which uses free parts of that space between 640K and 1 meg to map pages of memory above 1 meg into that space to be usable by application programs. It was used sometimes for the ability in a programming language to have large arrays larger than 64 kilobytes, but it was not very fast. It was kind of a kludge. There was a standard called LIM, the Lotus Intel Microsoft standard for expanded memory, which standardized the way in which that memory was accessed and the way that drivers would be implemented to support it. Extended memory is normal memory, above 1 megabyte, not accessed in a bank switching scheme like EMS, expanded memory. Anyhow, let's start Windows for Workgroups. Nice little splash screen there. Takes a while for the network stack to come up on these Windows for Workgroups systems. Okay. Oops. And as you can see, we have lots of software on this thing. We'll go ahead and arrange icons here to make it a little bit cleaner. We have a Telnet program, Microsoft Multimedia. These are the old Microsoft home titles. Encarta, Musical Instruments, Dinosaurs, Dangerous Creatures, and Ancient Lands. Early CD-ROM interactive titles, which I actually think in a lot of ways are better than anything that's on the web right now. Now, while we're on the topic of multimedia, this machine has an original Creative Labs Sound Blaster 16 ISA card, not ISA plug and play. It's configured entirely with jumper switches for, interrupt request line, direct memory access lines, the I/O ports that it uses for normal sound card operation, as well as the MPU 401 compatible MIDI port, which is kind of multiplexed onto the joystick port on a DE15 connector that has a custom breakout cable that will split it into a joystick port as well as a MIDI input and output. Also have Visual C++, an early C and C++ IDE. This version, 1.52c, was the last produced that would generate executable code for MS-DOS and 16-bit Windows 3.1. Have a DOS extender, Microsoft Open Database Connectivity, Win32 applications. Now that is, although this is 16-bit Windows, it does have the Win32S subsystem installed on it. So a certain subset of Win32 applications can run on Windows 3.11 with that particular set of dynamic link libraries installed. Early Nazca Mosaic web browser. Some samples from this Visual C++, Study Bible application. Open Wacom is another C and C++ IDE. Pretty well-known compiler. It's now open source. Adobe Type Manager for rendering Adobe, I believe it's Type 1 fonts. Paint Shop. That's a graphics program. Audio software is just the Creative Labs stuff, the mixer, a help guide, WinZip, very useful tool, an early Netscape Navigator, Probably 4.52 if I had to guess. No, it's 4.07. I misspoke there. MIRC for Internet Relay Chat. The 16-bit version is still available for download from their website even to this day. This is a companion CD for a book about Visual Basic. One of our icons disappeared. I believe there are some bugs in the video driver for this S3 ViRGE DX based video card in here. Causes some odd behavior in Program Manager and Windows 3.1 in general. We also have WSIRC, which is an older IRC client that, for reasons of nostalgia, I always like to install on my Windows 3.1 systems. We also have VB 3.0. So it was kind of the first programming environment that I ever got into. I made a lot of really silly rubbish in this environment back in the mid-90s. But it taught me some things about programming. Incidentally, now I don't do any Visual Basic programming for pay, even though I am a professional software developer. I end up doing more Node.js, some C, wide variety of languages, but VB and Windows, as well as C# and other Windowsy things, don't really come into play in my professional life. Although one of my early jobs was doing Visual Basic development for a water irrigation authority that's local to my area. Startup things in here will start up when Windows loads. This is a client for connecting to IBM mainframes, which I do have occasion to do every now and then. And we've got some various other things. Microsoft Office, this is 4.3. Word 6.0 being the only component installed here. A newer version of Visual Basic, which I actually use a lot for writing old school software in my own time, kind of as a hobby. Anyhow, that's about it for our little tour of the applications on this Windows 3.11 setup. So now, let's boot into the other operating system. As I said, this also has OS2 Warp version 4.52 installed on it, and to boot into that, we have to type the following command: C:\/OS2 \boot /OS2. You requested to start OS2 from drive C. You want to continue? We'll say yes. This will mess around with the files on the root of drive C and get it going to run OS2 instead of DOS. Basically saves off io.sys and ms-dos.sys and gets OS2 loader in there. Here's the BIOS screen. I recently replaced the CMOS battery on this thing because, well, it died long ago, and I would always have to go in and set the date and time as well as the floppy drive configuration to get this thing going. So I put in a new battery. It's a little what's it called? CR2032 battery, lithium. Pretty easy replacement, and now it remembers its settings perfectly. Let's go ahead and boot this up. Boot menu for OS2. And here we go. There is a slight problem with my networking configuration that I haven't really tried to sort out, but it doesn't actually prevent networking from operating well, so I haven't put a whole lot of effort into that either. Every time you do a dual boot situation like this, when you come back into OS2 after using DOS, it forces a check disk on drive C, presumably because some DOS disk utilities can corrupt extended attributes that OS2 uses to store metadata about files that don't fit directly into the space for metadata in the FAT file system. I am not running HPFS on this machine, as that would make the dual boot scenario, which I do like a lot, impossible. Ideally, I would have an additional hard drive on this thing that was formatted for HPFS to store files on and other such things, gaining the benefit of file names longer than 8.3, as well as more metadata, reduced disk fragmentation, and the like. But at this point, the second drive I had in this machine failed. I did have backups of everything, so at this point I have no such setup. Looks like everything was good on the check disk procedure. Now this drive is partitioned into two partitions, a 2 gig partition and about a 1 gig partition. They're both fat. This is that networking problem that we just bypassed. It does get a default gateway from my DHCP server, which is on the switch, so it doesn't cause any actual operational problems with the system. I can get on the internet with it, albeit at rather slow speeds. And it has a Realtek 8139-based network card in it. And we've got our nice little clock. No hourglass for OS2, as it generally is a far more sophisticated operating system than any version of Windows ever has been and likely ever will be. Yes, I am an OS2 fanboy, and I don't mind that shows. So starting some internet servers, I just minimize these. Now on this machine, on this operating system, I have far more applications installed. On the launch pad down here, we can get a DOS prompt, OS2 prompt, Program Manager, Visual Basic, Open Wacom, Visual C++. I even have IBM Visual Age for Basic, which is IBM's OS2 and Windows native answer to Microsoft's Visual Basic. That's a product that had great potential in my opinion, but it is very unstable. Just the normal process of developing an application in this environment leads to constant crashes. It is almost unusable on any OS2 version or system that I've ever tried it on, and there have been many. We're not even gonna really play with this at all, because I don't want to subject my viewers to the pain that is Visual Age for Basic and its tendency to crash quite frequently. I will, however, load up Visual Basic to display the ability of OS2 to run Windows 3.1 applications perfectly well. It can load any number of Windows 3.1 applications, even in separate memory spaces. It will actually load a separate instance of the entire Windows 3.1 subsystem for each app if you configure it to do things that way. It can also share them, but this dedicated memory space feature is really useful, as you can have 10 Windows 3.1 applications loaded, memory permitting of course, at the same time, each in their own memory space, and if one crashes, very much unlike Windows 3.1, the real thing, it will not bring down all the others. The slogan they had, a better DOS than DOS and a better Windows than Windows for OS2, was very much true, in my opinion, at the time, at least for 16-bit Windows. They unfortunately never got compatibility with 32, much less 64-bit Windows, but they were a far better implementer of Windows and DOS than Microsoft ever was. Ironically, a lot of people believe that OS2's failure to take off in the mainstream marketplace was largely due to the fact that OS2 was so good at running DOS and Windows applications that third-party software vendors didn't have any incentive to develop native OS2 applications, since building Windows 3.1 applications would allow them to target both Windows 3.1 and OS2 without investing in native OS2 development. So this is a program that I've been developing recently to keep track of my computer collection. It uses a Microsoft Access database with a Visual Basic 4.0 front end. A lot of this is not implemented yet. We can pull up a system or two here, just kind of see what it looks like. Change vendors here. I could make this let's see, how about an Apple? We'll turn this IBM into an Apple. It's not actually going to save that, so anyway, that's kind of where we're going with that. I think it should be pretty neat when it's done. Anyhow, that's about the extent of this tour here. Guess I could show you a little bit around the OS2 system folder. Got the system setup in here, which is much like the Windows control panel. All kinds of settings here. And that's about it. Anyhow, thanks for watching. Please leave a comment if you would like to, and we will see you later.